You saw me fondling with the different USB keys. You're lucky because I nearly inflicted on you a presentation which I gave to the Supreme Court of Brazil. But thank God I found the right file. They were very interested in the whole question of fake news and how to tackle disinformation. And you probably know what happened in the presidential elections. They elected a president which I consider extreme right, and it was to a large extent based on fake news. They have not followed our advice. I'm not saying it's easy to follow, but for me, just now, it was a reminder that these issues are actually important. I'm very honored to speak here in this European series of lectures, and also at the Red House, because I heard of it already in Brussels as one of the best think tanks. I am myself the founder of the EURACTIV Media Network, as you kindly mentioned. I now focus on Fondation EURACTIV, which is also a think tank. We focus on two things. One is policies to help the health of the media sector, and the other thing is executive education. If you have questions on the second part, they can come later. Right now, I will focus on disinformation, the link with European elections, briefly, and more importantly, the solutions. What can be done in order to enhance the role of the media and to make them strive as also as an economic sector. In fact, my outline, and you can interrupt me anyway, don't hesitate, to jump in, contradict, tell me if something is not clear. And in case you want to speak in Bulgarian when you want to intervene, that's absolutely fine. Georgi will help. So this is my outline, briefly on credentials, and going right for it for press freedom and democracy, the problem of fake news, and the solution in our view, which is having a more healthy media sector, and what could come from the European elections if they go more or less all right. This will be the only advertising bit. The EURACTIV Media Network is present in 12 countries, so we have a lot of experience with cooperation between different media and with using different languages. Not be longer on that. What I'm presenting right now has also been presented 10 days ago to EPSC. EPSC is the internal think tank of the European Commission, and it's quite influential in preparing policies for the future. I was addressing 45 high-level EU officials and also commissioners' cabinets. They are the staff of the commissioners. I know I speak to an expert audience, so I'll not explain who they are more in detail. And what I want to convey to you is that their response was quite enthusiastic. So the kind of ideas which I'm suggesting, I'm not pretending they are completely new, but they are bundled in a new way. If the Parliament coming from the election asks for these kind of priorities, the European Commission is able to deliver. So this is not a dream which I'm presenting. Press freedom is a real issue. And here the news is not great. Sorry that I have to show that. I'm sure most who knows already about the rank of Bulgaria regarding the press freedom index. Who knew already? I see 1/3 of the people, maybe half of the people raising their hand. Your country is at the rank 111. Frankly, it's not great. It's below most of the countries in Central Europe. I'm not saying that Western Europe is perfect. My own country, France, is at rank 45, which is not very good for a country that claims to be, a leading light for human rights, etc. And some countries that were excellent have declined. For example, the US is, no, I said 45 for France, sorry, it's 33 for France, and the US is now at 45, so below France. It was probably above France a while back. Why is that? You can discuss yourself. There are probably a number of reasons. Typically, it's interference from the government, interference from the shareholders, and maybe other problems as well which we can come back to. But this is not a given. This is something that can evolve over time if there is good coordination. I want to make a small cultural reference here. Which of you know the film by Visconti or the novel by Tommaso di Lampedusa, Il Gattopardo? Who knows it already? Not very many people. I really recommend this movie. It's a movie basically about the development of a new democracy in Italy at the end of the 19th century. And this is also a love story, like most good movies, between him. He's an aristocrat, so bearing traditions, strong values, etc., but no more money, declining influence. And she's the new game. She's the daughter of a baker. She has money, she's coming up. And for me, this is a good analogy. Obviously, the media is here. It's the old aristocrats, strong values, quality, but decreasing reach. And she is the social media, the Facebook and Google. And 10 years ago, we were all hoping that this would be another marriage between the media and the social platforms, that it would unleash greater democracy, European citizen initiatives, more transparency, of course, while retaining quality. And what has happened is, yes, there was more transparency, etc., but the quality has declined. It has declined in the media sector because we have less money, less journalists, less time to write good articles. The quality on the media is still higher than on social media platforms, and the quality has been lower on social media platforms, notably because of disinformation. So the problem is getting worse. Since 1 year and a half, at the European level, there is a strong awareness of the problem of fake news. Fake news is a shorthand. In more political circles, we call it disinformation, but we are talking about the same. There are also some abuses by platforms. They are advertising driven. There have been a lot of scandals about privacy. And this is a wake-up call, and maybe this is, in fact, an opportunity for the media sector, because our type of values, our type of standards can actually be a reference if they are multiplied also on the social media platforms. This is the instinct reaction by politicians, is to write a new law and to give the power to a judge, or even worse, to a minister, to shoot down the news that is supposed to be fake news. And of course, it will be the news that they don't like. This is called censorship. There is another issue, which is that it's very slow. If you want any legal process to respect the rights of defense, you cannot hit the fake news that is going viral. So my analogy here is like on these video games, some of you have children and maybe unfortunately they use these video games, shoot them down, you have to go very fast, and of course you make a lot of mistakes. I hear that in Bulgaria a new media law is being written to implement some European directives, and Georgi and I, we were addressing today at lunch, we were addressing the Bulgarian Union of Journalists, and they are very worried because they are not consulted on this kind of laws. I don't have a view on the details, but not consulting the media profession on a law that concerns itself, that is worrying. The typical problem in other countries is that fake news are used as a pretext to introduce censorship. And it happens also in the West. In my own country, President Macron triggered a law. Initially, it was even called the law on false news, not fake news, false news. It sounded like in the novel by Orwell. You could imagine the Ministry of Truth determining what is right and what is wrong. And that is not what the media profession wants. We believe that the media profession should be self-regulated, not subject to laws and judges which decide what is right and what is wrong. As for the platforms, it may be different because they are advertising-driven, not value-driven. Now, I go very fast. Something about the media sector and the way it is currently structured. As I said, I'm now leading a think tank. So I'm not involved in the management of the media where Georgi is one of the senior editors. And as I was making this move from management to a think tank, I decided to do a tour d'Europe and to visit all these media, talking to editors-in-chief and publishers, and to listen to what they wanted in terms of cooperation across border, what they expect from Europe, what are their main issues. And I knew there were problems in the media sector, but after this tour, I was even more catastrophic. No, that's not good English. I was even more worried because even some great brands which you find here, typically you're talking of SMEs led by old journalists, people even older than myself, who don't really have a clue about the technology and they don't have a vision about what their media company should be doing in 10 years. So clearly, I felt there is a need to change some things. One need to change is the management itself. That's why I believe in empowering a new generation of people, and they are not only journalists. Marketing and technology and social media, etc., is as important for the media as the journalists are. So that's one aspect, training. And the other aspect is what can the European Union do in order to help the evolution of the media. Basically, we are too traditional. We need to innovate faster. And just like my example with Il Gattopardo, you know, the expression in English, plus ça change, they use it in French. You need to change everything so that everything stays the same. It's the same in our sector. We want to uphold strong journalism ethics, and for that, we need to change a lot of things. Just protecting the way we are is not a solution. I was also a long time ago a strategy consultant, and I'm used to simplifying the situation of a sector around a few diagrams. And for me, there are three ways for the media sector to go. The main way, unfortunately, is to die. And frankly, it has happened a lot to media companies already. Today, we have in Europe about half the journalist jobs that we had 15 years ago. So if we don't act differently, the same will happen for other media companies. I think the broadcasting world is pretty okay because there are lots of public funding, but the private sector media is really at risk. And obviously, there are private sector broadcasters as well. And then you have the two other ways. You have the integration, merging, etc., or you have cooperation. Integration is not necessarily a bad thing. Traditionally, at the EU level, every new mandate has some kind of expert group or commissioner group looking at the media sector, and they quickly agree that diversity is very important. They quickly agree that one should not touch the national level because it's too sensitive. And they say concentration is a bad thing. But now it's evolving. 10 days ago, the Directorate General Competition of the European Commission has issued new guidelines about how competition applies in the media sector, and cooperation or even concentration is not necessarily a bad thing. It's better to have one media going with another one rather than both of them going to die. And I want to add something special about Central Europe. When I started this media network, we started in Central Europe because there was a lot more need for information about the EU due to the enlargement coming. Christina will remember that. And at the time, there was a lot more foreign investment in Central Europe than there is today. It was mainly from Germany, Switzerland, and the US. Why not the US? There are good media there as well. Very little from France. And I think what I will say is controversial because most of you are interested in Bulgarian media, but I think very often those foreign-owned media in Central Europe, they were among the best. Why? Because they were less dependent on the national government, they were less dependent on oligarchs, they were normal media businesses trying to satisfy the clients by providing good quality. So I think cross-border investment is not an issue, it's actually part of a solution. And then you have the third way to go, which is cooperation. This is a traditional way. You say, okay, I will not go into your market, but we will cooperate nicely, we will not compete too hard. And the obvious way to go between the media is to exchange editorial content, to have article exchange networks. And the EURACTIV Media Network is one of them, but we have tried to develop also an economic model. I don't have time to go too much in detail, but the problem of this European network is that most of them are not sustainable. They don't have a business model, and also they don't use modern technologies, for example, to translate articles. It's not just enough to agree to exchange, you need to translate them very fast. And for that, artificial intelligence translation technologies would be very useful. We can go back to these points later if you wish. Now, there is some momentum to change and to look at the European media sector. Which of you knows the German philosopher Habermas? That's great. I'm very impressed. Normally, it's only a few people raising their hands. So probably there are people in the room knowing my topic better than me. Do grab the microphone soon. He said many interesting things on the public sphere, not only the European public sphere. And one quote here is, the European-wide public sphere will rather emerge from the mutual opening of existing national universes to one another. There are people, when I talk of a European media sector, they say, oh yes, Politico, EURACTIV, EU Observer, the Brussels media. No, this is not the European media sector. And I don't dream that EURACTIV will suddenly dominate in many countries, etc. No, that's not the point. What we need is to interconnect the different media landscape which already exist at the national level. I will not read all the other quotes. You probably hear often enough about Maria Gabriel. I will just mention what Jean-Claude Juncker said, because it's written in French here. He said, the European Union needs to have media weapons. The word weapon is a bit strong. Some people reproached him this quote, but I think it's quite right. Imagine that Brexit does happen. I hope not, but imagine that it does happen. You see that most of the cross-border media in Europe are Anglo-Saxon, either American or British. It means our relations between different countries are informed by foreign media. Is it acceptable? I don't think so. They have a role to play. There's no way to keep them outside. But if you are a Parisian, you want to know what's going on in Berlin, you should be able to read some French and German media in the language of your choice. We are in the 21st century, not in the 19th century. I said that fake news, disinformation can be an opportunity for the media sector. Let me be a little bit more technical for a second. This kind of melting pot is a summary of what the algorithms are doing. The software pieces which decide on what you look at when you use Facebook or when you do web searches. And the current indicators can be regrouped in 4 categories. According to proximity, if it's your friends liking something, of course it will appear more in your feed. Relevance, popularity, and mainly advertising potential. Advertising potential is a very strong driver because these big companies, they need to satisfy their clients and they also need to satisfy the stock exchange. And fake news tend to be viral quickly because often they are written with a view to humor or playing on some basic instinct of people, and therefore they carry a lot of advertisement. Fake news is a big business, it's not just a political issue. And what we are suggesting from the high-level expert group is to add another series of indicators which we can call trust indicators. And basically, it's about indicating the credibility of a source. So if at this minute the Russia Today publishes an article, it will start at a low level of visibility. And maybe it's a good article, and then it will increase in visibility. If the Financial Times or Le Monde publish an article at the same minute, it will start with a high visibility. But if the fact checkers show that actually it's wrong, it will drop in visibility. And the platforms have committed to doing these things, but they are extremely slow. Basically, self-regulation, just asking them nicely, does not work. We need to move to stronger instruments. The main challenge for the media is not just political interference or interference by the shareholders, which here you call oligarch. The main challenge is revenues. If the media was rich enough and was profitable businesses, then it would not have to go to the government or to the European Commission or to the shareholders to ask for more money. It would be more independent and it would do a better job. And the problem is that we have lost 90% of the advertising revenue to the platforms. They don't hire journalists, they don't pay much tax, and we are poorer. The subscription, we have lost most of it because on the internet you get a lot of content for free. And therefore we need to develop other business models. I don't have time to go through that, but sponsoring can play a role. Most media groups develop profitable events series. This one could be organized by a think tank together with some media, maybe doing a great job. Training can help, and you could also think of research and development help from the European institutions. There are billions of funding available at the European level, and for the moment, really peanuts is going to the media sector. In fact, there is one program which is called the Media Program at the EU level. Anybody knows the Media Program? Yes? Do you know what it is about? What sector is it helping? Exactly, the cinema. So it's great for them, but frankly, they misuse the word. I think we need money as much as Cannes, etc. And on the other hand, we need to pay for staff, maybe to pay a bit better, and also to have higher skills, young people, data scientists, psychologists, marketing people, not just journalists. And then we need to invest a lot in technology. So the balance is not right for the moment. Help from the European elections. There will be strong calls from the new MEPs to do something about that. Why? First of all, because they will be fresh from a campaign. They will be facing fake news themselves. They will have direct experience of the problems. And the returning MEPs are also well aware of these issues. I'm interacting regarding these issues with the 4 mainstream groups which exist at the European Parliament. I'm less interested in the fringe groups on the extreme right or the extreme left, frankly. And the 4 main groups are EPP, the center-right, the Liberals in the center, the Socialists, and the Greens. The Greens are now seen as mainstream in Brussels. It may be a little bit different in parts of Central Europe. And a lot of these people support having a big priority for regulating the platforms and helping the media sector. Even the Anglo-Saxon press is now well aware and supporting this. I was really surprised when I saw this cover by The Economist saying the determinators. And when you read the articles behind this cover, it's really asking for the governments and especially the European Commission to use its powers in order to better regulate what the social media platforms are doing. They stop short of asking for help to the media sector, because this is not in the British tradition, but I think we need to go one step further. And I will, how am I doing on time? How many more minutes do you give me, Christina? Tell me. All right. I will probably finish with this one slide, which shows some issues and some elements of solutions. If you are interested, I have a few more slides, for example, regarding the details of the policy package, which I'm recommending, but it's getting a little bit more technocratic, so it will depend on popular demand. And then there are a few other things regarding training schemes and what kind of events are considered in order to transform this into reality. First of all, regarding structural issues. We already addressed the lack of a European public space and the fact that we are dependent on the Anglo-Saxon press. So we need to go more towards cooperation and language technologies. Secondly, national fragmentation, fears about coordination, we addressed that. One way is to think ahead of the future structure of the media sector. If we just lament about our current issues, there is no way out. Let's think of how the media sector will be in 10 or 15 years. And let's see how we can get there while surviving. There is more and more talk lately about European champions. I can show you more examples of that if you are interested as a think tank. You probably, who heard about the competition decision on the merger Alstom-Siemens? Did you? Okay, not very much. It does not concern Bulgaria that directly. Basically, the European Commission has used its powers to forbid this merger between a French and a German company. And this is triggering a lot of resistance. I think it's a bad decision. I was myself a competition official, so I know not the details, but the big picture. And there is call for having bigger companies. 15 years ago, if you counted the top 50 companies in the world, a lot of them were European. Today, there are just a few. And in the media sector, it's the same. We are talking of SMEs. Even the great brands that you know, they are SMEs. If you go to the Spiegel, one of the best newspapers in Germany, it's not a huge company. So we need to create a European sector, probably with some cross-border champions, which, depending on your culture, you can call an industrial policy if you are French or German. If you are Anglo-Saxon, you talk of a sector strategy because it sounds a bit softer, but this is the same. What about debriefing the current mandate? What has happened in this area in the current mandate? Because of demagogy and nationalism, everybody is aware about the issues. The agreement was to have platform co-regulation. Co-regulation does not mean self-regulation. Self-regulation is like waving the carrots. You will have a good reputation if you play the good European citizen, but it's not very strong. If you want a donkey to move faster, you need the carrot, but sometimes also the stick. And that's not used currently. Also, there is a tendency by the EU, because of the European Parliament, which likes to legislate on directives, to trigger new legislation. But new legislation is very slow. The recent Audiovisual Media Directive and the Copyright Directive have taken all of the last mandate of 5 years to go from the first idea to the decision now, and it is still to be implemented in national law. Our problems in the media sector, which create big democratic problems, are urgent. We cannot wait for the next 5 years. So we should use, notably, the competition policy instruments. There are other things which are to be done. For example, regarding media literacy. If you have children, you probably expect their class teachers to tell them about the difference between advertising and news. In the future, one should teach them about the difference between quality news and fake news. But this is a long process. It will not help in the next elections. And then the most important thing, and in fact, the summary of my recommendation, is that in the current mandate, there was a lot of work on digital single market, basically suppressing the borders regarding anything digital. I think this was necessary. This is a typical European approach, but it's not enough. It's what you call a horizontal policy. Now we need to develop vertical policies which tackle the problems of the platforms and the problems of the media sector. As I talk to a lot of policymakers, this could become one of the top 10 priorities for the next mandate. President Juncker had digital single market as one of his top 10. I hope the replacement, the next president, will have a top 10 priority, which could be spelled out in the following way. It should not be about protecting the media sector. This is too narrow. It should not be about being tough on the platforms. That's too narrow. The real objective is democracy. I would call this priority democracy in the digital world, sound platforms, and independent media. Independent media, again, is not just about principles, it's also about having revenues to be autonomous. And this priority could be enacted, led by a democracy commissioner, a new thing, with a democracy directorate general, regrouping a number of competences within the Commission so that things can go faster. I'm nearly done. These people should use the policy instruments in order to rebalance the ecosystem. There is an economic system between the platforms, the advertising world, and the media. I told you earlier that the media lost 90% of its advertising to the platforms. If we would regain just 10%, the world would be completely different in our sector. We would do a much better job. And this is possible because this copyright directive will in fact open negotiations between the huge platforms and the small media companies. But the copyright directive will not be enough. We also need the accompanying measures by the policy makers. And finally, the EU is updating its long-term budget perspectives. And as part of that, a big chunk is about research and development. And as I said before, for the moment, it's peanuts that goes to the media sector. There is still a chance in the autumn to reopen this file. In fact, the fact that we are negotiating on Brexit means this file is slowing down a little bit, which gives a little bit more time, and the new Commission coming in could fine-tune the long-term budget perspectives and foresee more help for the media sector. I'm not suggesting that the European Commission should subsidize the media sector in a big way. And to try to become a little bit more interactive towards the end, let me make a little survey. Who knows Euronews? Okay, most of you, as I expected. Who knows the shareholders of Euronews? The majority is?
From Egypt.
Yes. Until recently, the majority was from Egypt. Initially, it was mainly state-owned broadcasters. And in the last 2 years, now the majority is American. But the Egyptians are still very much involved. Georgi wrote a lot about that. And Euronews was mainly financed based on EU subsidies. So it's obviously not a great success. But at least it exists, and it's actually a good multilingual TV channel. Who knows about Euranet? It's a media, it's a radio cooperation network. I know some of you know it. I think it's a good project, but it's dependent on just one contract with the European Commission. And from what I hear, it's very much in danger because there has been no efforts to diversify. You need other sources of revenue, advertising, sponsoring, etc., to get out of the typical public sector mentality. Who knows about Press Europe? Okay, so what is it?
It's just a different language on a European issue.
That's right. And it was basically web-based, taking articles from around Europe, translating them. It was operated by Courrier International, a subsidiary of Le Monde, but it was stopped 5 years ago. Again, it was dependent on just one contract with the European Commission. So having this dependency on one source of EU funding is not right. And who knows Europal TV? Nobody. Which... Exactly. And for me, it's not an independent media. And it was actually voted down by the Parliament itself. Basically, creating new media from Brussels is not a good idea. What is needed is to help the normal media, which some of us represent, to innovate more and therefore to provide a better job for democracy. So these are the main things I wanted to address up front. I hope you disagree with a number of points so that we can have an interesting debate, or that you have some practical hints on how to make it happen. Thank you very much.
Аз ще идвам с микрофона при въпроси от страна на публиката.
Thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Irina Nedeva from Association of European Journalists in Bulgaria, and I want to ask you about what you think that the copyright directive You think that it will somehow balance ecosystem platforms, but we think that it might endanger small and independent media in countries like Bulgaria, for instance, because nobody will take care for contracting small and independent media, and in general it could basically limit the independent editorial content because it will not have any visibility on the social platforms. Well, it's better for our lecturer to answer my question and maybe to explain how it will not affect the small and independent media.
Maybe you want to gather several questions together?
Hello, Desi Gabriel is my name. For me, it was very interesting to learn that part of this algorithm that you explained to us contains this element about fake news ranking. But I was wondering, what is the definition of fake news? And could there be actually a very objective assessment of what is fake news and what is not fake news? Because I think we all can think of examples where what is fake news for one group of people is the truth for the other. I can give examples, but I think you know what, you can imagine what I have in mind.
Okay, thank you for the lecture. First of all, I have two questions. The first one is you said that the platforms are not helping. You just didn't mention it. If the platforms are helping the media to regulate the spreading of false news, but at some point, I would say that certain hate speech regulations and racism regulations on the social media actually overlap with the channels for spreading false news. If you could comment on that, because something new, even in Bulgaria, we noticed it already. And the second thing that I noted was for the new directives on the capitalization of different IPs and content on these platforms. If aren't traditional media companies like newspapers and TV, aren't they customers of the platform? Because I don't seem to understand, because they seem to like to share their stuff and produce on the platform, and then they want to also capitalize that on, and I don't understand it. Can you comment on this, like, two-way of going on the problem?
Right? No easy questions. Shall I?
Just to ask you if you can summarize briefly the copyright reform, because I'm not sure that everybody here knows the main points, because you will discuss this with Irina from the association.
I'm not an expert in the copyright directive, so I will maybe not summarize, but oversimplify it. If you take Google, for example, if you do a search, they will typically point to some results, which can be all kinds of news, but notably media news. And to do that, they will do two things. One is to analyze the whole articles which are on the media websites. That's the first use they do of your content without asking. And secondly, they will typically quote what they call a snippet, which is a few sentences, and they also don't pay for that. And a number of media have said that they would like to be asked, and of course, they would agree only if they have a share in the advertisement. Because what happens is that next to those search results, you have some advertisement, and now even on top of it. If you remember, 15 years ago, when Google started to be well known, there was a lot fewer advertising. Now it's a lot of advertisement, typically. And this advertisement can be helpful, perhaps, for the users, but it's actually replacing the advertising which used to be on the media website. So it's a real economic issue. And I can, at the same time, address the last question which you put, the gentleman upstairs. I would not say that the media is a customer of the platforms. It's a provider of the platforms, and to some extent, indeed, a beneficiary. But it's not directly a commercial relationship. And a lot of us in the media sector think that it should become a commercial relationship. Now, your concern is correct. It will be much easier for you to negotiate with Google and Facebook if you are the Financial Times than if you are even EURACTIV. I will not point to media in the room which I don't know well enough. That is true. And that's why we need to bundle. We need to organize better. Frankly, the media advocacy landscape, the lobbyists for our sector, they are not very well organized. And I would, to put it nicely, I would say that they don't have enough resources to have enough of the best people. That's to put it nicely. I'm not a lobbyist myself, we are a think tank, but very clearly the small publishers, which is the vast majority of our sector, should bundle and give their negotiation right to some people who will negotiate on behalf of the media sector. When I was a European Commission official, I was dealing with competition matters. And I remember very well, I was useful in helping people to negotiate. This was fully appropriate. When there was one dominant player not willing to share something, and when there was a small player asking to get to some essential facility, this is a legal world, then the European Commission was telling them, okay, either you come to an agreement, or we will have to step in. And obviously they were coming to an agreement. I think we will need something like that in the media sector. If I'm a bit too technical, you can stop me. Now, the copyright directive is not perfect. And I will not go into many details, but there has been a lot of fake news about the copyright directive as well. And frankly, some of it not only diffused by the platform, but even paid by the platforms. For example, it was said that the copyright directive would lead to censorship. It was said that you could not make humor about things anymore, that you could not take some politicians' images and put something funny on them because then it would be considered a copyright infringement, etc. And this is not true, because there are a lot of let-outs, a lot of things for private use, etc. The directive is by definition rather general, so there is scope for implementing it in national law, and I'm not too worried. If the platforms had not done so much miscommunication and so much lobbying about the copyright directive, maybe indeed it would be clearer, it would have come faster, and we would now have the laws already. I was glad to hear that you come from the Association of European Journalists, and I know that it's very strong in Bulgaria and in some other countries as well. It is Journalist Union and other journalist associations like AJ and the Société des Rédacteurs and all this world, which can help to shape the legislation and help to also negotiate with the platforms.
Definition of fake news.
Yes, absolutely. Definition of fake news. Fake news and disinformation in principle are the same, but the word fake news has been misused a lot by Trump. He uses it to describe our sector, which is really a paradox, because our sector has high standards, much higher than the rest that you find on the internet. And therefore, most of the policy circles have agreed to use the word disinformation instead. And to keep it short, disinformation can be defined as intentionally wrong news with a political or commercial objective. So the stress is on intentionally wrong. We do mistakes on EURACTIV as well, and then we correct them. They are not fake news. They can be false news on occasions, but they can be corrected. Typically, fake news are not corrected by the source of the fake news. They can be fact-checked by others. And I want to say a word about fact-checking, because it's one of the potential services that the media could provide. A bit earlier, I was pointing to new elements of business models. Maybe or not, don't worry. And I think this is one of the things that the media sector could be providing. I told you about trust indicators, which is about assessing the credibility of sources. And I told you briefly about fact-checking, which is checking the veracity and the credibility of some news. These are services which typically journalists are good at making, and we need to be paid for that. And right now, there is a whole series of projects in the EU institutions to subsidize this, but again, it will be short contracts for 1 or 2 years. I think we should define what are the systemic platforms, what are the platforms which are a threat or an opportunity for democracy. Just like we have defined systemic banks during the financial crisis, democracy is as important as the economy, and those systemic platforms should have what is called a must-carry obligation. Must carry trust indicators, must carry fact-checking services, and they should pay for it. And obviously, the EU institutions can accompany those negotiations so that this can be one little revenue stream coming to the media sector. I think I've handled, did I miss something important? Yes.
There are more questions in the room.
Yeah, I'm sure there are more questions. I wanted to say one thing also on the definitions, because somebody talked about hate speech, etc. It's a different conceptual category: fake news, so intentionally wrong information, and illegal or harmful news. Illegal or harmful news should be censored, and therefore they have to be narrowly defined. The typical examples are racism or child pornography. And those, I think it's appropriate that they should be taken down. And in fact, the platforms, I have to say, they are not all wrong. Facebook has made big efforts to reduce illegal and harmful content. The best example is in Germany. It has led to some controversies, etc., but altogether, it's improving in this area.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Velina, and I have a quick comment and a question. It's actually about what you just said. We all know in here that social media and social networks are two different things. Facebook and Google and newspapers and TV. So shouldn't the regulations be different about these things? I mean, talking about fake news and fact-checking, that is absolutely necessary in media, but about hate speech and social networks like Facebook, you're not really obligated to check your stuff. That's a freedom of speech.
Yes. I absolutely agree with your comment and therefore your question. And let me bring together several things which we have addressed already. The notion of self-regulation, co-regulation legislation, and the notion of different categories of actors. Right now, it is considered that there are only two categories. You have on the one hand the media sector, which is typically unregulated in terms of free press, but there are a lot of self-imposed regulations, such as journalist standards. And the broadcasting sector is much more heavily regulated. During political campaigns, there are some obligations, etc., which is absolutely natural. So high standards there. And then on the other hand, you have the platforms. They claim to be just an infrastructure, like if they were a telecom operator. And that may have been true 20 years ago, but it's not the case anymore. The main source in Europe of their not being, from that they infer that they are not responsible for their content, and therefore they can do what they want, basically just under public opinion pressure. The legal basis for that is the e-commerce directive, which has an article about no liability for the platforms. I think we should change that. We should define a third category in between, which is for systemic platforms. France is trying to define a category for tax reasons, because they want Google and Facebook and a few others to pay their tax properly, which is correct. I think we should use slightly modified definitions regarding the systemic platforms. They have to be regulated relatively heavily because they are super powerful, and as I said, they are advertising driven. They are important for freedom of expression. One should not suppress fake news, as I said, but one should be very challenging in terms of visibility given to fake news. As for the media sector, I think it should remain as it is in this regard. It should be self-regulated. Otherwise, in countries including Central Europe, you will have a misuse of these instruments by politicians.
From what you said, there is a new kind of degree of freedom and democracy in new media and social media. And from this perspective, I think that you kind of push a little bit fast into this kind of regulation activity. Maybe your background too is kind of pushing you that way. But isn't it more important and more necessary to kind of take the other kind of approach, because social media and social and new media are very transformative for the whole social relationship, for the whole social philosophy of new society, if you wish. If from this point of view, isn't it more necessary to give a little bit more freedom to all these kind of new inventions, if you will, technological inventions, to kind of get a little bit free development in order to be able to assess what is the positive, what is the negative, and what kind of direction it will give to the whole development of media, but of society at the same time. And from this point, I could give you as a practical example, in a way, what I mean. When Americans say, see what we developed. We developed the biggest technological companies on the basis of internet and social media, and at the same time, Europe stays like not so much the center of development and of using this kind of technology to create something new. It's more like the emphasis on the regulation already, because they don't want to hurry up so much in regulating, and they say we won't be in a hurry to do not kill the chicken with the golden eggs or the hen with the golden eggs, and at the same time our focus is a little bit more on regulation. Thank you.
Can I ask a question which goes in the same direction, but it's a little...
You can use this one.
Yeah, sure. Another alternative could be, those platforms, they have been developed by very talented young Americans and so on. They are very successful in Europe and across the world, but some countries have decided to have their own. You know that the Russians, they have their own Google, they have their own Facebook and so on. Would European Facebook and a European Google be a good answer to all the questions of whether to regulate or not to regulate? We can just imagine that the European platforms will be less driven by profit and will be maybe, I don't know, publicly funded or something like that. They would be more fair in the sense that fake news would not come at the top, because in my experience, when we have obvious fake news, like for example Marine Le Pen saying that the European Union has adopted Sharia law, when you do a search with Marine Le Pen Sharia law, her videos and statements are on the top, and the fact-check journalists are very, very far below. So I think a European Google would be more fair. Is this a good response? I think it completes your question, because one is to have a very liberal approach, another one is to have you know, our own solution within our European community.
So I like the questions by the gentleman in blue because it's challenging what I say. and it's absolutely fine. And I can tell you that in Brussels circles, what you are saying is very well heard, very widespread. In fact, it would be an interesting topic if some of you are investigative journalists to see how many NGOs are actually supported indirectly by Google or by Facebook. I don't want to call it a conspiracy theory because that would be excessive. Sometimes it's even transparent. But I've myself met a number of NGO leaders or EU officials. They use terminology which reminds me of something. And then I ask them, where did you read it? With whom did you talk? And it's very interesting. You often see the platforms behind it. Most lobbying companies and most law firms in Brussels work with the platforms one way or another. So it's becoming the dominant speech, but you do put good questions. I think the key is data privacy. That's a big differentiation between the US and Europe. It's for historic reasons, and there are differences in Europe, but generally speaking, we are much more attached to data privacy than they are in the US. In fact, you may remember that after the Cambridge Analytica scandals, Zuckerberg agreed to speak in Congress. He refused to speak in front of the European Parliament hearings. He spoke in a closed circle because he was worried about our politicians. But at the Congress, he declared that actually he would be inspired by the data privacy standards in Europe. A great statement. It needs to be fulfilled with actions. There is a lot of PR behind it, and they need to be guided in actually doing it. You are basically a promoter of the free internet, and I don't disagree with those principles. It's like building a scapegoat. You know, sometimes if you ask for a copyright directive or you ask for some form of regulation, people tell you, oh yeah, but I will not be able to access the internet for free, or I will not get content for free anymore. Yes, you will. It's not an issue. There is always more. Every year there is more content available on the internet. What we need is to respect the people who are providing this content and to develop new business models which are not exploiting the media sector against its will. I'm not even sure that it will work. We have to go in that direction. There have been attempts, as you may have heard, in Germany, in Spain, in Belgium. Some media, or sometimes a lot of the media, or sometimes even the legislator, has tried to limit the free recourse of the platforms to the media content, and in every case it didn't work for the reason that one of you in the back was addressing, which is that of course the platforms bring visibility to the media, and on EURACTIV, if we avoid the diffusion of our content on Facebook and Google, we will lose readers. We don't want to do that. Basically the national level is not enough anymore. I've said before that you have big platforms negotiating against small media SMEs. Well, even our countries are small compared to those big platforms. That's why we need to bundle. And when people talk about European sovereignty or sovereignty for the media sector, it's not building a super state in Brussels. It's just that our level, our scale is too small at the national level. Now, regarding Georgi's ideas, I think regarding the media sector, it will happen. I think we will have some European champions. I'm French, as you heard loud and clear, so I'm a bit more interested than others in the French-German dimension. Who has heard about the Aachen Treaty, the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle? Very few people. It's not... There were fake news about... Yes, there was a fake news about this treaty giving up Alsace and Lorraine from France to Germany. I was born in Lorraine, I can tell you this will not happen. But there will be initiatives based on this treaty. The previous such treaty was called the Traité de l'Élysée, and it had a huge role in order to trigger the European Union, more or less the one that we know. So this new treaty may also play a role. There is a paragraph about media initiatives, and I know that some things will happen. One possibility is that there would be a youth-oriented platform developed initially on a French-German basis, but with the potential to make it European. To be honest, maybe I shouldn't say so, but I will anyway. To be honest, it has been tried before regarding search engines, for example. There is one which is called Quant. A lot of good people use Quant. I confess I don't for the moment. Maybe I will in the future. I'm starting to boycott Amazon. I choose Fnac. It's not better, but at least they pay their taxes, and they are nearly as good. So maybe some people should use Quant. There was an attempt 10 years ago. It was called Quero. It really didn't work. So as for the traditional platforms as we know them today, I'm not sure it will work. But we have to build new actors based on the new regulation. Data privacy can be a winning factor. Data privacy together with the ownership of our data. You know, based on the GDPR directive, the directives on data privacy, you have been asked by Facebook and Google to confirm a very long text. Who read the text before confirming? I didn't. Congratulations to both of you. If I simplify very much, you have confirmed that you give the ownership of your data to those platforms. In theory, you can move this data to another player. Who has moved his or her data to another platform? Nobody, because it's quite complex. But I think in the future it will happen. Personally, I use Le Monde often, and I would be delighted to give Le Monde access to my Facebook data, my Google data, so that they give me articles which are more relevant. I'd love to do that. For the moment, Facebook offers me the opportunity to do so and to delete my Facebook profile, which is a bit of a difficult choice. So it will go in this direction, and I think new actors could be created, probably different from the current dominant players, based on data privacy and the media sector. We have not talked about Netflix, and I know we should probably not be too long. Netflix is on the border of this whole series of issues. People talk about GAFA. Sometimes they say GAFAM with Microsoft. For me, Microsoft is not the issue anymore. I would call GAFAN, N standing for Netflix. Netflix is providing a great service. They have understood that they have to work with our film industry. So no big problem for the moment. But in the future, they will abuse their dominant position, of course, like the others have done. And there are initiatives, notably in Germany, to develop some European platforms to share films with a paying model that would make money for the TV broadcasters of films and for the film industry. So there, it's a battle which is not lost yet, because the Netflix market is new and probably there is room for 2 or 3 players. As for replacing Facebook, it will be difficult, but there may be some more targeted platforms in the future which could be built on the basis of this industrial policy I'm calling for.
Ако няма, да приключим тази вечер с благодарности към Christophe Leclerq за лекцията и за дискусията. Благодаря ви.
Thank you very much. I can add 3 Bulgarian words. Merci, I've heard it works. Svoboda, I think that's freedom, right? And media, it's a word that you use. So Svoboda media is my message.